This really got me thinking. Eric asks, now that my Wolverines have won a national title, which historic programs and their fans need a national title most? I'm thinking of factors that should include but not be limited to: 1, length of drought; 2, somewhat sustained success so that a national title is within the realm of possibility; 3, rabid fan base. My teams in mind are USC, Florida, Tennessee, Penn State, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Miami, and Texas. You'd even throw Ohio State, Florida State, and Auburn in there. Maybe top tier Ohio State, Texas, Oklahoma; second tier Florida State, Tennessee, Florida, Auburn, Penn State. I don't think USC or Miami cares enough, and Nebraska hasn't been good enough? ? So this is a great question. And it got me thinking about who needs to win a national title, who can actually realistically think about winning a national title, and who is in a good place right now. So, like, Eric mentioned Florida State. Like, I don't think Florida State needs to win a national title right now. Like, I don't think that would fill a hole in the fan base's hearts or anything like that. These guys know that their team won a national title in 2013. It hasn't been that long. If you are in your 30s, well, let's say if you're in your late 30s, early 40s, you remember multiple Florida State national titles. So I don't think that is one of those where they're just desperate, clamoring, need it to validate the program. I think they look at the program and how much it's improved, and they don't have to feel that way. And they also understand, after the previous few years before Mike Norvell got them out of the hole, that it's not that easy. And they appreciate probably the 2013 title, the 99 title, the 93 title even more. I think Florida's in that boat too. I think, Florida fans, I'm very critical of their expectations. I've always said they expect too much. They got too much success too fast and didn't quite understand how to handle that. But I think now that they've been riding the roller coaster for a while, I think they understand how hard it was to win those national titles. And they had 3 in pretty rapid succession: 96, 06, 08. So that's another situation where you've got people who remember winning a national title. I don't know that they necessarily need it to fill a hole in the psyche of the fan base. They would love to be good and competitive again. But I think, like, if you asked most Florida people right now, they would take just being good and competitive right now, because they've been mediocre the last couple of years. I don't know that it gets better this year. We'll see. But I think if you said, what do you want? Obviously, everybody wants a national title, but I think they'd be happy with good and competitive. I don't think they need a national title. Miami, I think, same kind of boat. Like, they would prefer being consistently competitive first. Auburn, they've won it so recently. They won one in 2010. They played for it again in 2013. And nobody understands the roller coaster better than an Auburn fan. Like, they get this. There's some wild drops and there's some crazy rises. This is not a linear progression here. So I don't think they need it at Auburn. Nebraska, they would just be happy going to a bowl game right now. I think the picture that gets painted of Nebraska fans as pining for the 90s and saying the 90s are going to be back, I don't think they feel that way. I think they're very realistic in general as a group, as a whole. And I think they understand being relatively competitive in the Big Ten is the goal. I don't think they need a national title. So who does need a national title? I made a list. And again, I think I may do this in written form as well later this week, because this is one I think there are going to be some you vehemently disagree with. I think there'll be a bunch of these where you're nodding your head. But the one that I think needs it most is the one that, given the list I just gave you, shouldn't be on this list. But like, you listen to the rhetoric coming out of the program, you look at the situation they're in right now, and it feels like they need it more than anybody. And that's Ohio State. Ohio State last won a national title in 2014. Ohio State played for the national title in 2020. If a field goal at midnight on New Year's Eve goes in the Peach Bowl 2 years ago, Ohio State has a very recent national championship, because they would have beaten TCU in the national title game. But that didn't happen. What they have is a 3-game losing streak to Michigan and a bunch of almost there, but not quite, dating back to 2015, when they probably had the most talented team in the country, but didn't make the playoff because they lost to Michigan State. Psychologically, yeah, they need this. And then when you got Ryan Day standing on the 50-yard line at the spring game going, the season is about beating a team up north and winning a national title. Like, that's something a fan says. That's not something the head coach usually says. So, I mean, they're all in on this thing. And then you look at the roster. It is deep. It is old. They have then bolstered the deepness and the oldness by adding more talent out of the transfer portal. They're as set up as they've been. Like, I cannot remember a team recently that felt this national title or bust. I think 2009 Florida, maybe. They were coming off a national title in 2008. Tim Tebow, Brandon Spikes, a bunch of good players came back. They did lose a lot of good players too, and that came back to haunt them in the SEC championship game. But that season was just an absolute slog. Every game they were supposed to win by 50. If they didn't win by 50, it was a crushing disappointment. And then you had the SEC championship game. That's the one, Urban Meyer had to go to the emergency room when they got back to Gainesville because he was having medical issues. And a lot of it probably stress-induced because that season was just misery for everybody involved. And what's crazy is if there'd been a college football playoff, they probably would have been in it. Even the 4 team, they definitely would have been in the 12 team. And that team might have still won the national title because the Alabama team that beat them was good. The Texas team that Alabama ended up playing was really good. But I don't know that they were appreciably better than that Florida team. In a rematch, Florida might have been able to beat Alabama. 2015 Ohio State's the other one I could think of that felt this national title or bust. And I remember when they lost to Michigan State, just felt so combustible. I covered the Michigan game the following week, and that was, Zeke Elliott had just gone off after the Michigan State game. Everybody was sort of in a not great place because they knew it. They were so talented, and they knew that Michigan State was going to block them from the playoff because Michigan State was going to go on and win the Big Ten. They were going to make the playoff. In a 12-team playoff system, that Ohio State team probably wins the 2015 national title. So maybe we're not talking about this. But they didn't. And now Ohio State's in this situation where they've lost 3 in a row to Michigan. And that has a huge impact on this too. Like if Ohio State beats Michigan one of those 3 years, I don't think the psychological weight is sitting on them the way it is now. It's not sitting on Ryan Day the way it is now. But it feels like they got to win one. Here's another one. Oregon. Oregon's the only one on this list that I made that has never won a national title. And Oregon has been the most common answer to the question that you often get. And this is I've gotten this mailbag question every offseason for the last 10 years. Who will be the next first-time national champion? The last first-time national champion was Florida in 1996. It's been that long since somebody broke into the club. Oregon feels like the team that can break into the club, but they haven't done it yet. They played for the national title twice since 2010, but they haven't broken through. And Dan Lanning inherited a really good situation when he got the job, but they have not lived up to their potential yet under Dan Lanning. I think they can. Obviously, he's a very young coach. We always talk about Kirby Smart and where he was in year 2, year 3 as a head coach, how different he is now after 6, 7, 8 years as a head coach. But Oregon had the most talented team in the Pac-12 last year. They lost to Washington twice. One time because they couldn't execute on 4th down. One time because they got physically dominated in the 4th quarter. That has to get fixed. Now they're not the most talented team in their league, but they are one of the most talented teams in their league. Oregon has been recruiting at a level that it should be able to compete with anyone. And so this could be the year. Next year could be the year. This feels like if you keep recruiting at this level, you keep pushing, Dan Lanning evolves as a head coach, learns some things as he gets more experience, that they eventually break through. But that's one. They felt like they've been there, really been in the mix for the last almost 15 years. They haven't quite been able to break through. Here's another one, and this one is it's a mystifying one. Texas A&M. Texas A&M's last national title was 1939. The Aggies just have not been able to get over the hump, and it hasn't mattered. Like, they should have been consistently in the national title mix. Like Oklahoma, for example, last won a national title in 2000, but played for it a couple of times, was in the playoff. Like, that's the type of program Texas A&M should be, but has never been. Like, it doesn't matter what conference they're in, it seems. Like Southwest Conference, Big 12, SEC, doesn't matter. They can't seem to break through into regular contention. And it doesn't make a lot of sense because they have the location, they have the passionate fan base, they have the money. They have everything they need. It's just never quite come together. And so they threw a lot of money at Jimbo Fisher with the expectation that it would come together, and it didn't. And that's just, because at that point, when they hired him, it was like, okay, if this doesn't work, what's going to work? Well, now you try again. You got Mike Elko, who I thought did a really great job at Duke in 2 years. And actually, I think will do a better job than Jimbo Fisher did at Texas A&M. You've got a pretty decent talent base. So nobody's expecting Mike Elko to win the national title this year at Texas A&M. But if he could build on the recruiting that Jimbo Fisher was doing and then coach the team better on the field, A&M should be competitive in the SEC, should be able to reach national title contention. But again, we've been saying that for like 60 years. So I don't know. I really don't know how that works, but that's a program that really, really needs one. We'll stay in the state of Texas, and I guess we'll also stay in the SEC. I've got Texas on this list too. And they're in a much better place than most of the teams on this list and relative to being able to get there. Like, Texas could win the national title this year. I think that's an entirely realistic possibility. But I think the reason I feel like they have to win one, and it may sound silly, but just to retire the Texas is back joke. Like, we can't say Texas is back until they win a national title, right? Is that fair? But I think they need to retire that joke. It's just like the Georgia people needed to get that 1980 joke retired, and then they did, and now it's gone, and they never think about that again. I think Texas winning a national title here in the next few years would allow that joke to be retired. And I think, we talked about it with Bobby Burton yesterday on the show. Texas is doing the things they need to do to make this happen. They're creating NFL players again. They've managed NIL and the transfer portal very well. Like, a couple of years ago, they were throwing money at some people who used to be 5-star recruits. They come in, they didn't add much to the team. Like, but you look at what they added last year, you look at what they've added this year, very strategic in the portal. They kept what they needed to keep and then spot recruited in the portal to replace very specific needs. Like, you lose a Jatavian Sanders, get an Amari Niblack. That feels like a 1-for-1 substitution right there. That's a big, big move. They didn't throw money at a lot of people in the transfer portal. They went and got what they needed. Ryan, who's an Alabama fan, says they upped their competition and they're going to suffer the consequences in Austin, Texas. Hey, Ryan, didn't Texas and Alabama play a game last year in Tuscaloosa? How did that game work out? I'm just saying. It feels like they're pretty prepared for this. Maybe I'm wrong, but they feel like they've prepared for this. So I'm putting Texas on this list just to retire that joke. I'm also putting Oklahoma on this list. Now, Oklahoma's last national title was 2000, 24 years ago. That's a long-ass time, especially for a program that has been in the mix for national title contention quite a bit. Played for it in 2004, played for it in 2008. But here's what I will say about Oklahoma. Since the early 2010s, Oklahoma has not had what it is needed on the line of scrimmage to be legitimately competitive for the national title. And you saw that when Oklahoma got in the playoff against Clemson, against LSU. You saw where the deficiencies were. Like Barry Switzer was sounding the alarm about this in 2013 when he's talking about their D-line. He's like, where's the Gerald McCoy? Where's the Tommy Harris? Now, maybe David Stone, 5-star recruit, who's a freshman at Oklahoma this year. Maybe he's that next guy. But as you heard yesterday when we were talking with Eddie Radosevich and George Stoya, their offensive line is in a state of flux. This was going to be a transition year for their offensive line. So I'm not saying I expect Oklahoma to win a national title this year. I'm saying for Oklahoma to be as historically competitive as it has been, and Oklahoma is one of the few programs that is almost always good. Like Ohio State is always good. Oklahoma is probably the next most consistent program. They've had a few dips, like the late 90s, and that's pretty much it. So to be that, to continue to be that, Oklahoma must get better on the line of scrimmage. Must. Not an option. Because in the league they're going into, if they aren't, they will not be competitive in the league. You have to be competitive at the line of scrimmage to win in the SEC. And the bonus part of that is if you're competitive in the SEC, you can compete for national titles. So that's really where they're at. Brent Venables, he'll get first crack at doing that. But I think Brent Venables has worked at Oklahoma long enough between the head coaching stint and the DC stint to understand that they will not accept mediocrity for very long. So you can't have these years where you have a transition year on the offensive line. Like you should just be ready to reload. That's what Georgia does. That's what Alabama does. That's what you've got to be able to do. If you want to be what Oklahoma has been historically, but be that in the SEC, you have to be able to do that. OSU in the chat. Texas top 3 or top 5 in the SEC. According to FanDuel, Texas is a co-favorite to win the league. Georgia and Texas has the highest win total in the SEC at FanDuel, both of them with 10.5. So, again, if we're talking about right now, they're probably best positioned of the teams on this list other than Ohio State to do it this year. 2 more on this list. Love this question. Love this question because it gets you thinking. All right. Penn State, last national title, 1986. Remember they beat Miami in the Fiesta Bowl? Maybe you don't remember that. Maybe you weren't even born when that happened. Penn State has been in a weird place. Like for pretty much the entirety of the 14 playoff era, Penn State has been good enough to be close, not good enough to be in. The 12-team playoff will break that logjam. The 12-team playoff will get them into the playoff as long as they stay as consistent as they have been. But they still will have to prove they can beat a team like Ohio State or a team like Michigan. And I'm talking about the Ohio State, Michigan teams of the last few years that Penn State has not been able to jump over. They still will have to prove that they can beat teams like that. Like you're going to see a team like that probably right out of the gate in the 12-team playoff. And so you're going to have to beat multiple teams like that to win a national title. But that's where James Franklin is. Like they've lived on this plateau and it's been good enough. Like you can't say he's doing a bad job. They're winning double-digit games almost every year. But they want more. Well, now you can say the system's not holding us back. You've just got to win games within the system. That is the hard part. So James Franklin's he has new coordinators. Andy Kotelnicki comes in from Kansas. You're hoping that his creativity, and if you watch that Kansas offense, it was super fun. You're hoping that unlocks something in Drew Aller. I would think Tom Allen replacing Manny Diaz at defensive coordinator, probably going to be fairly equal. Manny was doing a great job. That's why he's the head coach at Duke now. Tom Allen is a very good defensive tactician. It didn't work out as a head coach at Indiana. That's a really hard job. Can Penn State beat these types of teams, though? That is what we need to find out. The schedule this year should actually give us a little better preview of that. It's not your old Penn State 2-game schedule. Like, they're going to have to work to get there. At West Virginia is not an easy place to start. West Virginia is going to be decent to pretty good again this year. They're at USC. They're at Wisconsin. They get Ohio State at home, Washington. Like, this is not going to be an easy trek through this schedule. But it should have them prepared. So if they're sitting there at 10-2 at the end of the season, to go into the playoff and be competitive. That's what they've got to be. One more. Tennessee. How many Tennessee people have as their online handle the phrase feels like 98? How many people use that phrase once a month? 1998 was a long time ago. 1998 was the dial-up era. Can't be living in there. Got to live in the now. And Tennessee, I think, has improved enough to where the fans can live in the now. But they want more, obviously. And unlike Nebraska, where the fan base has sort of resigned itself that this is not going to happen again, Tennessee doesn't have to feel that way. I think 2022 was a good example of why Tennessee fans should not resign themselves to anything. They can bring in enough talent to win and win big. They can be competitive in the SEC. They can compete for national titles. They have that capability. It's probably not going to be as frequently as, say, a Georgia or an Alabama. But that doesn't mean it can't happen quite a bit. So Tennessee needs to win a national title. Got to quit living in 1998. Now, look, that 98 team was amazing. Al Wilson, Peerless Price, T. Martin. That was a hell of a group. But they're all my age. We're old. Time to have a new set. So I think Tennessee can do that. I think Tennessee, I wondered as Tennessee kind of wandered through the wilderness for a while if that was ever going to be possible again. But 2022 convinced me, yeah, it is possible. They definitely can upgrade and be one of those top-tier SEC programs. The question is, can they get over the hump this year? Can they get over the hump next year? When does that actually happen? When are they in the playoff? I think it's realistic to expect them to compete for a playoff spot this year. Should they win the national title? I don't know if they're deep enough for that. But once you're in the playoff, you got a shot. So I think Tennessee is one of those that we should be looking at as a potential playoff contender and as a team that can get back into that national title club. Great question from Eric. Thank you so much for that one. Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.